Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I got a really good viewer question the other day where they were asking for my help in purchasing a new rod and reel. And they didn't know if they should go with a spinning rod or if they should go with a bait casting rod and reel. And the reality is, this is a tough one to answer because it comes down to what's best for that individual angler. What are the techniques that you like to fish? What types of bodies of water are you fishing? What species are you looking for? Is it a rod and reel for a specific technique? And the question that, after I went back and forth with the viewer a little bit, really what it came down to is they were looking for a little bit of guidance as to, well, when is a spinning rod and reel better? When is a bait casting rod and reel better? So I figured I would do a little bit of a breakdown on the difference between a spinning rod and a bait casting rod so that some of the anglers out there might be able to use this as a little bit of guidance when it comes to making a rod and reel purchase. Now, I know there's a lot of more well-rounded, really seasoned anglers out there that probably don't need this information, but I do think that there is some very valuable information here that a lot of anglers will learn from. Today's video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app, which will help you select the best fishing places in the lake with features like the lake level, the current flow, the top baits tool, which will help you select the best baits for certain locations throughout the lake. Whether that's a clear water, stained water, dirty water, it'll choose the best bait for that location, provide you with all the information like what structure, what retrieve, different reel, all of the information that you need to catch the fish. This is in the app. The cool part about this app, though, is it's not just based on areas. It does provide you with specific tournament winning data that has been collected to help you figure out your best choices for baits and locations for whatever region of the lake it is that you want to fish. On top of that, not only does the app provide you with best locations, it gives you water clarity as well. So maybe you're on a lake like Lake Eufaula, where there is a bunch of different water clarity located throughout the entire lake. This will help you identify the clearest portions as well as the dirtiest portions of the lake. Plus, the Deep Dive app has now added the wind effect map, which is going to take all of the different wind conditions for the past couple of days and show you what banks on the lake are being hit the hardest. They also have inflow points that show you different places throughout the lake where your water is being flushed into the lake through different ditches and creeks and rivers, providing you with high percentage places to fish and letting you know what parts of the lake are going to be the best areas after a rain. Check out the Deep Dive app to help you become a better angler. The main difference that you need to recognize between a spinning reel and a bait casting reel is the spool positioning. So in this case, this is a spinning reel. The spool on here is what I like to refer to as a zero tension spool. What I mean by that is you don't have to turn the spool to pull the line off. The line comes freely off the spool as the weight of your bait pulls it off. Versus, say, a bait casting reel where you've actually got a spool built into the reel. The spool has to turn to pull the line off. So you actually have to have tension. So I like to refer to a baitcaster as a tension spool, meaning you have to pull that line off. So that's the biggest difference, because if you've got a zero tension spool, meaning the line comes off freely without having to turn the spool itself, what that means is the line comes off a lot faster and a lot easier. So from that standpoint, very important thing to recognize, because that's really going to dictate the techniques and the bait choices that you use with respect to that. Because since your line comes off a spinning reel much easier, you're going to get a lot of positives from that. One, you're going to be able to cast much further. You don't have to actually turn the spool, which is creating resistance on your bait, therefore preventing you from casting as long. So not only can you cast further, you can also then cast lighter baits. A lighter bait doesn't have to have the weight to turn the spool. It just comes off the spool really freely. So that's a fantastic thing. Most people out there would say that your spinning reels overall are going to be better for more of your finesse presentations. Now, in today's world, we do have BFS, your bait finesse systems, which are bait casting reels built specifically to throw really light baits. So you can counter some of that with today's high-end bait finesse systems. But if we're talking strictly between spinning reels and bait casting reels, spinning reels generally allow you to cast further, allow you to cast a lot lighter baits, and therefore you're able to get better distance, better put your bait in better strike zone areas potentially. Now, another thing to notice with that is the ease of use with a spinning reel is generally much better because you have a zero tension spool. You can cast, your bait goes out, it hits the water, and it stops. You don't get backlashes from it. With a bait caster, you actually have to have some control on the spool, whether you're using magnetic brakes or your braking system on the reel or you're using your thumb. If you don't stop the bait, the spool is going to continue. It has momentum, it continues, you get backlashes. So, from a usability standpoint, spinning reels are significantly easier. If you're a new angler, it's probably better to start out with a spinning reel, but having said that, at some point you're going to have to use a bait caster, or if you want to learn how to use a bait caster, at some point you're going to have to pick it up and just deal with the fact that you're going to get some backlashes to start. Uh, a couple other advantages to having a zero tension spool that a spinning reel would have: you've got the ability to really cast baits into tight areas easier than with a bait caster. So your skipability is generally going to be much better. Now, having said that, you don't have the same control for accuracy and you don't have the same control from a flipping standpoint. One of the keys to a bait caster is once you really learn how to master them, you can place a bait exactly where you want it because you're controlling the spool completely. If you're using a spinning reel and you go to skip your bait back into an area, it's really hard to slow that bait down, slowly like you might be able with a bait casting reel. So from an accuracy standpoint and a control standpoint, your bait casters are going to be significantly better. They are also much better with your bigger baits. The heavier a bait gets, the better a bait caster becomes because you can control that bait so much better. If you put a heavy bait, say you put a half-ounce bait on a spinning rod, you might be able to cast it a quarter mile, but your accuracy and your control become much harder than if you put that same half-ounce bait on a bait caster because you now have the ability to control the distance and accuracy much better on your bait caster. So that's also something that you definitely want to keep in mind. And then the last difference for me really comes down to control of fish. When you're holding a bait caster, you have much better leverage. So if you're fishing maybe in tight quarters or you're fishing a heavier cover and you really want to control that fish as you bring it to the boat or bring it to shore and keep it away from some of the, heavy log jams or pad clumps or whatever it is that you're fishing, you're going to have much better power on that fish. Part of that is just the actual positioning of the rod in your hand, giving you better leverage. It's also generally easier to use heavier line on bait casting gear than spinning gear. So if you have heavier line, you can really put power and leverage into that battle versus a spinning reel where you're holding it and you really are putting most of that leverage uh, on your wrist, which makes it harder to control the fish and harder to keep them away from cover. So if I'm fishing places where I feel like I need to control the fish once I've got them hooked, bait casting gear is generally better. So I'm not going to sit here and say one is better than the other because in my opinion they have a both have an extremely good place in an angler's arsenal. But generally for me, if I'm making choices, the spinning gear comes down to fishing more open water applications that are generally going to be more finessey, and the bait casting gear comes down to more power fishing applications, heavier baits, heavier tackle, and just overall better control on the fish. But they definitely both have a place in your tackle box. But if you're out there and you're looking to purchase a spinning reel or a bait casting reel, I highly recommend looking at the different techniques that you like to fish and the different bodies of water that you like to fish. And if you happen to fall more in line with your open water, more finessey approaches, spinning gear is probably an overall better choice. If you happen to be more of a heavy tackle, heavier baits, power type stuff, you're probably better off going with a bait caster. So hopefully this helps you guys. This was one of those things where I don't want to come out and say that there's a right or wrong answer because there isn't. It really comes down to angler preference. But for me, if I'm making a choice between using spinning and bait casting, these are generally the characteristics that I look at to make that determination. So hopefully, guys, you enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned to a new video coming out tomorrow.